Hello everyone. In the last video we outlined some of the essential security settings to make sure enabled as defaults in your Zoom account. And in this video I'm just going to outline a couple additional settings you can consider based on your use needs and what you think would work best in your settings. So we went through things like, again, not using personal meeting IDs, making sure that users can't join before you do, your meetings are password protected, that you have screen sharing disabled for your users, and that you have the lobby enabled. So we went through all of those, but I'm going to outline a couple other ones coming up here. So little things like this is nice as a host of a meeting. You can enable desktop reminders, so you get a notification on your desktop before your meetings begin. The chat, again, we said you can disable that if you prefer to not have any text chat enabled at all for your participants. Whether you do have that enabled or disabled, I do click on this setting to prevent participants from saving the chat. That does not then allows them or disables an option for them to save a file, a text file of that chat that happened during that meeting. Again, that doesn't prevent people from taking a screenshot or copying, pasting text from that, so that's something to consider. Again, if you would prefer to just disable text chat completely, you can do that here. I definitely encourage in educational settings that you disable private chat, make sure that's off. And that, again, only allows your users to be able to chat with the full group and not to have one-on-one chatting going on between them in a meeting. Unfortunately, you can't have that enabled where they can message you as the host and not each other. So I disable private chat altogether. Auto-saving chats, again, I do not create an auto-save of the chat setting depending on what the needs were for that meeting. Often they don't want to have necessarily a chat saved of that meeting. So as we go through things like play a sound when participants join, I have that on. Again, just a little reminder when people arrive at the lobby, and then also when I permit them in, I will hear a sound for that. And then you can make sure that, again, you don't need all of your attendees to hear that, but as a host, it's useful to have that just as a confirmation that you've permitted them from the lobby into your meeting. File transfer, again, is something that you can, depending on your needs for your meetings, you can disable if it's, again, in a class setting, and you may want to have the chat enabled for students to be able to pose questions, but you do not want them sending files through that, like images, things like that, then you can disable this option of file transfer for your meetings. As we go through, a couple other things like the toolbar, by default, this is off so that the toolbar disappear during the meeting, and then users just move the cursor and the toolbar will reappear when they need to mute or unmute themselves or disable or enable their video. If you find that your users are having difficulty and they say, I'm not sure where those options are going, and they're forgetting that, again, you just need to move the cursor to bring that back up, you can check that will stay on. So even in full screen with the video feeds on, they'll still see the toolbar along the bottom. It may kind of blur out or overlay over some of the content you might be sharing, but that is an option that you can enable. I have show Zoom windows during screen share enabled, that option here, and that allows me to, if I'm doing a tutorial of where to find things in the Zoom interface, if this is off, you'll be able to screen share, but they won't actually see your own toolbar, and they won't see the different Zoom settings that you might be trying to outline with them. So I enable this for myself so that I can show people the different functions in the Zoom platform. Again, we talked about I have screen sharing enabled for myself as a host, but disabled for any of my participants. And again, if I need to in a particular meeting to enable that, I can do that in meeting for a specific meeting, give someone the ability to start to share their screen. But by default, I ensure that I'm the only one who has that ability. This is an option as well. If you do give your users the ability to share their screen, you can make it so that they can only share a particular application and they couldn't share their entire desktop if you enable that. Other functions like the whiteboard, you can have a whiteboard that's available within your meetings, and again, that would be then interactive. I have that disabled so that it's just, again, it's not a function that would be enabled for my settings, but you can enable that. But no, again, that's an interactive component that students would have access to edit and add content to. Other than that, things like the nonverbal feedback I have enabled, where they can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or clapping icon, different things to give you some feedback, ensuring that people are clear on instructions and are following different parts of the discussion. That can be helpful without students needing to unmute themselves and give a verbal confirmation or write in the chat. So I have that enabled. Now here are a couple last settings here that we can outline. So things like allow removed participants to rejoin. If you need to, as the host, you can remove a participant from your meeting. And as long as you make sure that this is disabled, they won't have the ability to rejoin that meeting. If you hosted a meeting the following day or the following week with a new link, they will be able to rejoin. But that option ensures that when you remove someone, they will not be able to re-enter with the same meeting link. So I encourage, again, making sure that is disabled. Allow remove participants to rejoin is disabled. Here's another important one to mention. Allow participants to rename themselves. We talked about the best practice of ensuring students and people who attend your meeting, if they do not have their own Zoom account and they're joining as a guest, that they need to put their proper first and last name, or their name that they go by in your class that you know them as, ensuring they put that in their description before they join your meeting. And if they join by anything else, you do not admit them from the lobby. And so this function here makes sure that, again, once they join using that proper name, they can't change their name in meeting to something else that again, may be inappropriate. So that's a function I encourage people to disable, that they cannot rename themselves. And here's an option as well, depending on your use scenarios, is if people have created an account and they've assigned a profile picture to go along with their Zoom account, like I have with mine here, when your video is disabled, a profile picture will appear for users who have one associated with their account. You can choose to hide those profile pictures and instead have only names appear when people's video feeds are disabled. So that's again up to the individual user to decide if that's appropriate for your use settings. So those are the I think the next kind of steps in terms of settings to go through. And again, anything you edit here will become your defaults for all meetings you schedule going forward. You can edit a lot of these on a per meeting basis, but it's good to, again, look through, take the time to go through the settings and ensure that you have things set up the way that you are comfortable with and following some of these best practices we've talked about. So if you have any other questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'm happy to outline some of these things in more detail with people as we go forward. All right, take care, everyone.